Well, US President Donald Trump announced an economic exchange with Qatar worth $1.2 trillion as the deal-making between the US and the Gulf kept flowing. Washington and Doha vowed to deepen their defense partnership, while Qatar said it would buy up to 210 jets from US aircraft giant Boeing, which is a deal touted as the largest in the company's history. Trump has long been fascinated with aviation and sees it as a key to diplomacy. This is what analysts have noted, allowing world governments to appeal to him through the persuasive power of planes. That tendency is perhaps most evidenced by Qatar offering Trump that luxury jet for use as Air Force One, a gift the president has endorsed despite growing bipartisan scrutiny. But the US president also met with Syria's new leader and said Washington would consider normalizing relations with Syria. That sit-down reflected the remarkable rise of President Ahmed al-Sharaa, who years ago was wanted by the United States over al-Qaeda ties. For an expert view on the matter, we have with us this morning James Dorsey joining us on NDTV. Mr. Dorsey, thank you so much for your time. How should we interpret President Trump's historic meeting with Ahmed al-Sharaa, given that just months ago the US had actually listed him as linked to a terrorist organization?
The United States still lists him as linked to a terrorist organization. Fact of the matter is that the designation was maintained, even though over the last decade we've seen progressively Ahmed al-Sharaa and his Hayat Tahrir al-Sham rebel group move away from jihadist positions. In December, they toppled former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and it's been clear since then that the new government in Syria is trying to rebuild or build a relationship with the United States. That was something that the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, favored. And I think that was made very clear to Trump during his visit to the Gulf.
Also, Mr. Dorsey, we're hearing of this $96 billion aircraft deal that's been announced. Would you say this is transactional diplomacy, masking deeper military or energy ambitions between Doha and Washington?
Well, clearly, this is, at the moment you have about $3.6 trillion in Saudi, Qatari, and Emirati business deals, investments,
yes,
acquisitions from the United States. Those are huge amounts, of course. But what they do involve is they involve much closer cooperation between those Gulf states and the United States in military terms, in aviation, in technology, all of the kind of issues that the Gulf states and the United States are interested in.
Right, and then would you argue that this trip is primarily about business and optics? Or is there a deeper geopolitical recalibration underway as far as US Gulf relations are concerned?
I think it's both. Now, how far the geopolitical realignment goes, we'll have to see. In many ways, if you look at what Trump was saying in his speech, his major speech in Saudi Arabia, he essentially was putting the Gulf states, if not on par, but much closer to being on par with Israel in terms of their relationship to the United States and their importance to the United States. A lot of what Trump has done has been not what Israel wanted and perceived to be in its interest.
Right.
Now, what that all means, I think remains to be seen. I would see as the litmus test of the geopolitical aspects of the Trump trip two things. One is whether the United States acts on Israel's military presence in Syria, and that's complicated given that Trump, in his first term, recognized Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights, occupied during the 1967 Middle East War, and the second litmus test, of course, is whether he pushes seriously with leverage towards a ceasefire in Gaza.
Yes, we are keeping a close eye on all those developments. But then, Mr. Dorsey, looking at the full arc of Trump's Middle East tour, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Qatar, and next the UAE, do you think there's a story we're perhaps not paying enough attention to?
I think the greatest story here is really, or not the greatest story, an important story here is domestic US. With other words, what we're seeing is a policy pursued by Trump during his Gulf visit that is in line with the Make America Great Again faction of the Trump administration, which is much more critical of Israel, does not see Israeli and or US and Israeli interests by definition being identical, versus the pro-Israel faction or pro-Israel figures within the administration who've lost a number of battles in recent months.
Right. Meanwhile, as we wrap, I just want to touch upon another aspect, which is Trump's tone on Iran. It seems to have shifted from pressure to peaceful intent. Would you say this is diplomatic posturing, or do you see some real movement towards de-escalation?
Well, I think that that Trump, like Iran, wants to avoid a military conflagration. Right. The question really is at what price? Trump has said very clearly he does not want to see enrichment of uranium in Iran. He wants ballistic missiles and the Iranian relationship to non-state allies in the region to be part of any agreement. Iran has said none of that is negotiable. What's important here, I think, also is that the Gulf states are obviously concerned about the nuclear issue, but they are far more concerned about ballistic missiles and relationships to non-state allies. And so whether or not that bridge or that gap in the negotiations can be bridged is what we're going to have to wait and see.